The wind carried the scent of winter across the battlements of Obsidian Keep, sharp and clean, the kind of cold that stripped away pretense and left only truth behind. Kael Ravencrest stood alone at the edge of the ancient stone wall, his hands resting on rock that had witnessed the rise and fall of 7 generations of wolf kings before him. Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, and somewhere below in the vast expanse of his kingdom, 1,000,000 souls slept unaware that their king had not closed his eyes in 3 days. 42 years he had walked this earth. 20 of those years he had worn the crown of the 7 provinces, carried the weight of a throne forged in moonfire and consecrated in the blood of his ancestors. He had led armies into battle, signed treaties that ended centuries of conflict, buried warriors who had called him brother. He had done everything that was asked of a king and more. Everything except the one thing that mattered most. He had no heir. The thought settled into his chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of old pain through muscles that had learned to carry burdens without complaint. Below the battlements, the palace began to stir. Servants moved through the courtyards with their heads bowed. Guards changed shifts with the precision of men who understood that routine was the backbone of order. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to the turmoil that churned beneath the surface of its king. Kael lifted his face to the wind and let it bite at his skin. The cold was a familiar companion, more constant than any advisor, more honest than any courtier. It reminded him that he was still alive, still capable of feeling something beyond the dull ache that had become his constant shadow. His wolf stirred somewhere deep within him, a presence that had once burned like a second sun in his chest. Now it was little more than embers, a faint warmth that flickered occasionally but refused to catch flame. 15 years of silence. 15 years of reaching for that primal connection and finding only emptiness where his beast should have been. He knew the exact moment it had died. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when he stood alone with nothing but the wind and his thoughts. A battlefield turned to mud and blood, the sky choked with smoke from burning villages. He had been fighting on the Western Front, 3 days' ride from the capital, when the messenger had found him covered in the gore of his enemies and the ashes of his hope. Sarah was dead, his sister, his only family, the one person in all the 7 provinces who had looked at him and seen not a king, not a weapon, not a symbol of power, but simply Kael. She had been 16 years old, caught in an ambush while traveling to the northern sanctuary where she was supposed to be safe. The enemy had known exactly where to find her, exactly when she would be most vulnerable. They had made her death slow. They had made sure he would hear about every detail. Kael closed his eyes against the sunrise, but the darkness behind his lids offered no escape. He could still see her face, still hear her laughter echoing through the halls of the palace where they had grown up together. She had been the light in a world that demanded he become stone. When she died, something in him died with her. His wolf had retreated into silence, curling into itself like a wounded animal seeking a dark corner to wait for death. It had never spoken again. He could still shift when necessary, could still call upon the beast when battle demanded it, but the connection was hollow, mechanical. He moved through the forms of being a wolf, but he no longer felt like one. The Council of Elders had noticed, of course. They noticed everything, those ancient wolves with their calculating eyes and their careful words. For 20 years they had watched him rule without a mate, without an heir, and for 20 years they had bided their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had come 3 moons ago. The ultimatum had been delivered in the formal language of tradition, wrapped in silk and ceremony, but the threat beneath the words had been unmistakable. Choose a Luna within 1 year, or the crown would pass to another bloodline. The Ravencrest dynasty, unbroken for 300 years, would end with him. He should have cared more. He should have felt rage, defiance, the burning determination to protect his family's legacy. Instead, he had felt only a tired resignation, the weariness of a man who had been fighting wars for so long that he no longer remembered what peace felt like. Let them take it, he had thought in his darkest moments. Let them have the throne and the burden and the endless responsibility. Let me finally rest. But that was the coward's path, and whatever else Kael Ravencrest had become, he was not a coward. He had seen too many good men die for this kingdom to surrender it to politics and ambition. He owed them better than that. He owed Sarah better than that. The sound of boots on stone drew his attention, and he did not need to turn to know who approached. Only one person in the entire palace would dare to disturb him during these early morning vigils. Only one person who had earned the right to stand beside him without permission. General Theron came to rest at the wall, his armor gleaming dully in the growing light. He was older than Kael by a decade, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face carved with the lines of a man who had seen too much and remembered all of it. They had fought their first battle together 30 years ago, two young wolves with more courage than sense, and they had been fighting side by side ever since. They stood in silence for a long moment, two old warriors watching the sun rise over a kingdom they had bled to protect. Theron was the only person who ever called him by his name, the only one who refused to bow or scrape or treat him like something other than human. It was a gift Kael had never learned to properly thank him for. The general spoke without looking away from the horizon. "You look like death, Kael. When was the last time you slept?" Kael considered the question with the same careful attention he would give to a military strategy. Sleep had become an elusive enemy, one that ambushed him occasionally but refused to be captured or controlled. "I rested," he said finally. "Resting and sleeping are not the same thing." Theron's voice carried the gruff affection of decades of friendship. "The council meets again today. They will want an answer. They will get the same answer I gave last month and the month before. I will not choose a political bride. I will not mate for convenience." Theron turned then, his weathered face creased with concern that he would never admit to feeling. "And if the bond never comes? After 42 years, perhaps it simply does not exist for you. Perhaps some wolves are meant to walk alone." The words struck deeper than Theron probably intended, finding the soft tissue of doubt that Kael kept buried beneath layers of duty and discipline. He had asked himself the same question countless times in the silence of sleepless nights. What if there was no fated bond waiting for him? What if his wolf had been too damaged by grief to recognize its mate even if she stood before him? "Then I will walk alone," Kael said quietly, "but I will not pretend. I will not perform a mating ceremony with a woman who means nothing to me simply to satisfy the council's hunger for an heir. The kingdom needs stability." Theron's voice was careful, measured. He was not arguing, merely stating facts as he saw them. "Your enemies grow bolder with each passing year. The Northern Confederacy is testing our borders. The Eastern Alliance whispers of old grievances. If you fall without an heir, there will be war. There is always war." Kael's lips twisted into something that was not quite a smile. That is the one constant of ruling. Someone always wants what you have. Someone always thinks they could do it better. Theron fell silent, and the wind filled the space between them with its cold commentary. Below, the palace had fully awakened, and the sounds of daily life rose up like distant music. Horses in the stables, servants calling to each other, the clang of metal from the training grounds. The machinery of power grinding forward, indifferent to the doubts of the man who sat at its center. "Sarah would have wanted you to live." Theron spoke the words carefully, knowing they cut close to wounds that had never fully healed. Not just survive, Kael. Live. Find something beyond duty and obligation. Kael felt his jaw tighten, felt the familiar surge of grief and anger that always came when her name was spoken. He wanted to lash out, to tell Theron that he had no right to speak of what Sarah would have wanted, that no one could know what she would have wanted because she was dead, had been dead for 15 years, and nothing would ever bring her back. Instead, he said nothing. Some truths were too heavy for words. A messenger appeared at the entrance to the battlements, young and nervous, his scent sharp with the anxiety of someone about to deliver news to a king known for his cold disposition. He bowed so deeply that his forehead nearly touched the stone, and his voice trembled when he spoke. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. There has been an incident at the eastern gate." Kael turned slowly, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Incident was a word that covered a vast territory of possibilities, from minor disturbances to assassination attempts. The messenger's fear suggested something closer to the latter. "Speak," he commanded. A member of the royal guard was found injured outside the gates, critically wounded. A woman, a stranger to the palace, she tended to him before the watch could intervene. Kael's eyes narrowed. "And this required interrupting my morning because..." The messenger swallowed visibly. "Because she touched his blood, Your Majesty. She touched royal blood with her bare hands." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The blood of the royal guard carried the essence of the moonline, sacred and protected by laws older than the palace itself. To touch it without authorization was contamination. To touch it as an outsider was a crime punishable by death. And yet something in the messenger's voice suggested there was more to this story, something that had frightened the guards enough to send word directly to the king. "Tell me everything," Kael said, and his voice carried the weight of command that had sent armies marching into hell. The sun had climbed higher by the time Kael descended from the battlements, and the palace thrummed with the energy of scandal, barely contained. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward the eastern wing where the stranger was being held. Noble guests who had arrived for the council session gathered in small clusters, their voices low and eager, feeding on rumor like wolves on wounded prey. Kael ignored them all. He moved through the halls with the purposeful stride of a predator, his presence parting the crowds before him like water before the prow of a ship. General Theron walked half a step behind, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his sword, a silent warning to anyone foolish enough to approach without invitation. The reports had been fragmented, contradictory, colored by the fear and confusion of guards who had witnessed something they did not understand. A woman had appeared at the gates in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying pelts to sell at the morning market. She had found the wounded guard, had acted without hesitation to stem the bleeding, had saved his life through skill and quick thinking, and when the watch had finally arrived, they had found her kneeling in a pool of royal blood, her hands stained red, and she had not been afraid. That was the detail that had caught Kael's attention, the thread that pulled at something deep within his silent wolf. Every report mentioned it. She had not been afraid. When the guards had seized her, when they had bound her wrists and dragged her to the holding chamber, when they had spoken of execution and moonfire and the ancient laws she had violated, she had met their eyes and demanded to know what crime she had committed. Most people, when faced with the machinery of royal justice, crumbled. They wept, begged, prostrated themselves before the guards, and pleaded for mercy. This woman had done none of those things. She had stood straight and tall, and she had asked questions. It was either the behavior of someone too simple to understand the danger she was in, or someone who had faced death so many times that it no longer held any terror for her. Kael suspected it was the latter. The moon court had been prepared for her arrival, its vast chamber lit by silver torches that cast long shadows across the polished stone floor. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with constellations that told the story of the first wolves, the ones who had walked from the moon itself to claim dominion over the earth. Columns of black marble lined the walls, carved with images of great hunts and ancient battles, and at the far end of the chamber, the throne of the Wolf King sat empty, waiting. The nobility had gathered in force, drawn by the scent of scandal and the promise of entertainment. They filled the elevated galleries that lined both sides of the court, their silk robes and jeweled accessories glittering in the torchlight. Kael could feel their eyes on him as he entered, could sense the calculations running behind their carefully neutral expressions. Every one of them was wondering how he would handle this situation, what it would reveal about his strength or weakness, how they might turn it to their advantage. Let them wonder. Let them watch. He had been playing this game for 20 years, and he had not lost yet. Lord Aldrich Varen was already present, standing near the base of the throne with the barely concealed anticipation of a man who smelled opportunity. He was the leader of the Council of Elders, the most powerful noble in the realm after Kael himself, and he had made no secret of his belief that the Ravencrest line had ruled long enough. His hair had gone silver decades ago, and his face carried the harsh beauty of old marble, cold and unyielding. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing precisely the required depth and not a fraction more, "the contaminator awaits your judgment. Shall we proceed?" Kael ignored him, his attention fixed on the far doors where shadows moved with the approach of guards. The word contaminator sat badly in his ears, presuming guilt before any evidence had been presented. But that was Varen's way. He had already decided what he wanted the outcome to be, and was working backward to justify it. The doors opened, and Kael saw her for the first time. She was not what he had expected. The The reports had described a common woman, a pelt trader from the outer settlements, someone of no consequence or breeding. He had expected someone broken by poverty, weathered by hard labor, perhaps simple-minded enough to not understand the significance of what she had done. The woman who walked into the moon court was none of those things. She moved between her guards with the fluid grace of a hunter, her steps light and balanced despite the chains that bound her wrists. Her hair was dark, pulled back from a face that bore the marks of a life lived outdoors. There was a scar on her jaw, another on her forearm, the kind of scars that came from fights survived rather than accidents endured. Her clothes were practical, meant for travel and work, and they hung on a frame that was lean with muscle rather than soft with comfort. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were the color of amber, warm and bright, and they held absolutely no fear. She scanned the moon court with the careful attention of someone assessing threats, cataloging exits, planning for contingencies. When her gaze found Kael, it did not drop or falter or slide away in submission. She looked at him directly, measuring him the same way she had measured everything else. Something stirred in his chest, something that had been still for 15 years. He ignored it, forcing his expression to remain neutral as the guards brought her to the center of the court and forced her to her knees. She went down without resistance, but there was nothing defeated in the angle of her spine, the set of her shoulders. She knelt because the situation demanded it, not because she was broken. The elder priest stepped forward, his robes rustling against the stone floor. He was ancient, so old that no one could remember a time when he had not presided over the ceremonies of the moon court, and his voice cracked with the weight of ages when he spoke. "Lyra, of no house and no pack, you stand accused of contaminating the sacred blood of the moonline. The punishment for this crime is death by moonfire. Have you anything to say before judgment is pronounced?" Lyra. Kael turned this name over in his mind, feeling the shape of it, the sound of it. It suited her somehow, brief and direct without ornamentation. The woman raised her head, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily to the far corners of the chamber. "I would like to know," she said, "what crime I have actually committed." A murmur rippled through the galleries, nobles exchanging glances of shock and amusement. Lord Varen's eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line of displeasure. "You touched royal blood," the elder priest said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You contaminated the sacred essence of the moonline with your unclean hands." Lyra's expression did not change. "I touched a dying man. I stopped his bleeding. I saved his life. If that is a crime in this kingdom, then your laws are broken, not me." The murmur became a wave, voices rising in outrage and disbelief. No one spoke to the moon court this way. No one challenged the ancient laws with such casual defiance. Kael saw Varen's hand twitch toward the sword at his hip, saw the barely restrained fury in the noble's cold eyes, and beneath his own skin that strange stirring came again, stronger this time. "Silence," Kael commanded, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. The court fell still, every eye turning to him. He had not meant to speak, had not planned to intervene so directly, but the word had escaped him before he could stop it. He descended from the dais, each step measured and deliberate, and the crowd parted before him with the instinctive respect of prey animals before a predator. He stopped a few feet from where Lyra knelt, close enough to see the fine details of her face, the way her pulse beat steadily at her throat, the complete absence of trembling in her bound hands. She looked up at him without flinching. "You do not kneel like a woman who expects to die," he observed. "I have expected to die every day for 14 years, she replied. "Expectation and acceptance are not the same thing." The words struck something in him, resonated with a truth he had carried in his own chest for far too long. He studied her face, searching for deception, for fear hidden beneath bravado, for any sign that she was anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. He found nothing but steady amber eyes and the quiet strength of a woman who had learned to survive. "She will kneel," Varen cut in, his voice sharp with impatience, "or she will be forced to kneel. This is the moon court, not a marketplace for argument." Kael did not look at him. His attention remained fixed on Lyra, on the puzzle she presented, on the strange sensation building in his chest. "Where did you learn to tend wounds?" he asked, "with such skill that you saved a man who should have died?" "In the Darkwood," she answered simply. "When you live alone, you learn to heal yourself, or you die." Darkwood. The name sent a chill down many spines in the gallery. The Darkwood forest was a wild place, untamed and dangerous, filled with creatures that did not bow to the laws of civilized wolves. Few who entered it survived. Fewer still survived there alone for any length of time. 14 years, Kael said slowly. You lived in the Darkwood for 14 years. It was not a question, but she answered anyway. Since I was 14, since my pack decided I was not worth keeping. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, charged with implications that even the most politically minded nobles could not ignore. She had been a member of a pack. She had been cast out. And she had survived alone in the most dangerous forest in the 7 provinces for more than a decade. This was not a simple woman. This was something else entirely. What pack? Kael asked. Shadowfang. Another murmur, this one tinged with recognition. Shadowfang was a minor pack in the Northern Territories, known for their strict adherence to tradition and their harsh treatment of those who failed to meet their standards. They had been loyal to the crown for generations, unremarkable but reliable. Why were you cast out? Lyra's jaw tightened, the first sign of emotion she had shown since entering the court. My wolf did not wake at the first moon trial. They called me a hollow shell and branded me for exile. Kael felt his own wolf stir again, more strongly than before. There was something in her story that called to the beast within him, something that resonated with his own experience of loss and silence. He had not felt his wolf respond to anything in 15 years, and now it was reaching toward this stranger as if it had found something it had been searching for. He pushed the sensation down, forced it back into the darkness where it belonged. Now was not the time for weakness. Stand, he commanded. Varen stepped forward immediately. Your Majesty, the law requires that she kneel before the throne. She has not been granted the privilege of standing in your presence. Kael turned his head slowly, and something in his expression made Varen take an involuntary step backward. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried the unmistakable edge of warning. I said stand. Lyra rose in one fluid motion, her chains clinking softly as she found her balance. She was shorter than him by nearly a head, but she held herself with such assurance that the difference seemed irrelevant. She met his eyes again, and this time Kael let himself look, really look, into the amber depths that seemed to hold no secrets and no fear. The blood, he said quietly. Show me your hands. She extended them without hesitation, palms up, revealing skin that was clean and unmarked. There were calluses on her fingers, the rough texture of a woman who worked with her hands. But there was no trace of red, no stain of the sacred blood she had been accused of contaminating. Kael stared at her palms for a long moment, his mind racing through the implications. Royal blood did not simply wash away. It was part of the moonline essence, charged with power that had been passed down through generations of wolf kings. When it touched an outsider, it left a mark, a visible reminder of the contamination that could only be cleansed through ritual purification or death. Her hands were clean. The court physician, Kael said without looking away from Lyra. He examined the wound. What did he report? A lesser noble stepped forward, clutching a scroll in trembling hands. His voice cracked as he read. The guard was found with a wound that should have been fatal. The bleeding had been stopped with pressure and improvised bandaging. He will survive. And the blood on her hands. The noble hesitated, glancing nervously at Varen before continuing. It was absorbed. By the time the watch arrived, there was no trace of it on her skin. The physician believes. Speak, Kael commanded. The physician believes the blood recognized her, Your Majesty. As if she were of the moonline herself. The gallery erupted. Kael barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Lyra, on the way her expression shifted almost imperceptibly at the physician's words, surprise flickering in her amber eyes before being quickly controlled. She had not known. She had not expected this. That made 2 of them. And then his wolf, silent for 15 years, did something it had never done before. It howled. Not aloud, not in any way that the court could hear, but deep within his chest, in the place where man and beast merged into something greater than either. His wolf threw back its head and howled with a sound that was grief and joy and recognition and longing all twisted together into something that defied description. It howled as if it had finally found what it had been searching for through all those years of silence. Kael staggered. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Theron was at his side instantly, one hand gripping his elbow with the strength of long friendship. The general said nothing, asked nothing, simply held him steady while the world reordered itself around a truth Kael was not prepared to accept. It was not possible. He had stopped believing in possibility years ago. And yet his wolf was awake, fully awake, straining against the boundaries of his skin as if it wanted to burst free and claim the woman standing before him. It recognized her. It knew her. After 42 years of waiting, after 15 years of silence, it had found its mate. In an exile, in a hollow shell, in a woman who should have been nothing. Kael forced himself to breathe, forced his wolf back into submission through sheer force of will. He was king of the 7 provinces. He did not lose control. He did not allow his beast to dictate his actions. He was stone and steel and cold, cold logic, and he would not be undone by something as unpredictable as fate. But when he looked at Lyra again, he saw that she was watching him with new intensity, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something he could not hear. And there was recognition in her eyes, too. She had felt it. Whatever had happened when their eyes met, whatever had passed between them in that moment, she had felt it too. The court was still in chaos, nobles shouting over each other, Varen demanding order, the elder priest calling for silence that no one was providing. None of it mattered. None of it touched the stillness that had formed around Kael and the woman who had walked out of the Darkwood to turn his world upside down. "What is your name?" he asked, even though he already knew. He wanted to hear her say it. Lyra. She did not add a family name, a pack name, any of the honorifics that usually accompanied an introduction in court. Just the single word, given without apology. "Lyra," he repeated, and his wolf stirred again at the sound, pleased in a way that made him deeply uneasy. He turned to the court, and his voice cut through the chaos like a sword through paper. "This woman is not to be touched. She is not to be harmed. She will be given quarters in the palace, not the dungeons, and she will be treated as a guest until I determine the truth of what has happened here." Varen's face went pale with fury. "Your Majesty, the law—" "The law," Kael interrupted coldly, "exists to serve justice. If the blood itself has judged her innocent, who are we to disagree?" He did not wait for a response. He turned and walked out of the moon court, his wolf howling victory in his chest, and he did not look back to see if anyone was foolish enough to follow. The quarters they gave her were nothing like a prison. Lyra stood at the center of the room, turning slowly to take in the silk curtains, the carved furniture, the bed large enough to hold 4 people with room to spare. There was a fireplace crackling with warmth, a window that looked out over the palace gardens, and a door that had no lock on her side, but also had no guards stationed directly outside. It was the most luxurious cage she had ever been placed in. She moved to the window first, because old habits died hard, and because she needed to know her options. The drop was 3 stories, the gardens below patrolled by guards who walked in predictable patterns. Escapable, she decided. Difficult, but not impossible. The palace servants had provided clean clothes, food, and warm water for washing. She ignored all of it. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and examined her hands. They were clean, as they had been in the moon court, as they had been since the moment she had lifted them from the dying guard's wound and realized something was terribly wrong. The blood should have stained her skin. She had seen enough death, caused enough death, to know what royal blood looked like when it marked an outsider. It left traces that could not be washed away, marks that testified to contamination and demanded purification. Her hands bore no such marks. She turned them over, studying the calluses and scars that mapped her years in the Darkwood, and she tried to understand what had happened to her. The physician had said the blood was absorbed. The nobles had whispered of moonline recognition. The king himself had looked at her as if she were a puzzle he could not solve, and beneath her own skin something had stirred. She had felt it the moment their eyes met across the moon court, a sensation like heat spreading through her veins, like a sound too deep to hear vibrating in her bones. For 14 years, she had been hollow, empty of the wolf presence that should have defined her existence. For 14 years, she had told herself she did not miss what she had never truly had. She had been lying. When the king had looked at her, she had felt something wake inside her. Not fully, not completely, but enough to know it was there. Her wolf, the beast she had been told was dead or damaged or simply absent, had lifted its head and recognized something in him. It terrified her more than anything else that had happened that day. She had survived the Darkwood by trusting no one, depending on no one, expecting nothing from anyone but herself. She had built walls around her heart so high and so thick that nothing could penetrate them, and she had convinced herself that isolation was strength, that loneliness was safety. One look from a king, and those walls had begun to crack. She pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed deeply, the way she did when the forest became too quiet and the shadows grew too long. Control. She needed control. Whatever was happening to her, whatever the blood and the bond and the ancient laws meant, she would not allow herself to be swept away by forces beyond her understanding. She had been a victim once. She refused to be one again. The knock on her door came after midnight, soft and deliberate, the sound of someone who expected to be admitted rather than asking permission. Lyra was on her feet instantly, her body falling into a defensive stance that 14 years of survival had made instinctive. The door opened and the king walked in. He had changed from the formal attire of the moon court, trading silk and ceremony for simple black clothes that made him look less like a monarch and more like a warrior. The crown was gone, the jewels and insignia of office absent, and without them he seemed somehow more dangerous, more real. He closed the door behind him and stood just inside the threshold, his silver eyes finding hers in the flickering firelight. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Lyra studied him the way she would study a predator that had wandered into her territory, with respect and caution and a careful assessment of threat. He was tall, powerfully built, with the kind of muscles that came from real fighting rather than palace training. There was a scar on his neck, half hidden by his collar, and another on the back of his left hand. A warrior king, not a ceremonial one. He studied her with equal intensity, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "You should be afraid of me," he said finally. His voice was different than it had been in court, quieter, almost conversational. "You should be terrified." "Should I?" She kept her own voice steady. "Why?" "Because I am the king. Because I hold your life in my hands. Because everything you are and everything you could become depends entirely on my whim." Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. "Is that why you came here? To remind me of my place?" Something flickered in his silver eyes, something that might have been amusement or might have been pain. "No, I came to ask you a question." "Then ask." He moved further into the room, his steps slow and deliberate, giving her time to react, to retreat if she chose. She held her ground, and she saw approval flash across his face before he controlled it. "Who are you?" he asked. "Not your name, not your pack, not your history. Who are you truly?" It was not the question she had expected, and she found herself answering more honestly than she had intended. "I am someone who learned to survive when everyone expected me to die. I am someone who stopped waiting for rescue and started rescuing myself. I am someone who built a life from nothing and owes nothing to anyone." She paused, then added, "I am someone who does not know why the blood chose to recognize me, or why my wolf stirred when you looked at me. I am as confused by this as you are." The admission cost her something, and she saw that he recognized the price. "My wolf," he said slowly, "has been silent for 15 years, since my sister died in a war that should never have touched her. I thought it was broken beyond repair. I thought I was broken beyond repair." Lyra watched him, saw the grief that lived in the lines of his face, the weight that bowed his shoulders when he thought no one was watching. "And then you walked into my court," he continued, "and my wolf woke up and howled. For the first time in 15 years, I felt it truly alive because of you." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to explore. "I did not ask for this," Lyra said quietly. "Neither did I." He moved to the window, standing where she had stood earlier, looking out at the same gardens, the same walls, the same paths of potential escape. "But we cannot pretend it did not happen. The blood recognized you. My wolf recognized you. The ancient laws speak of such things, bonds that form without consent, connections that transcend choice." "The prophecy," Lyra said, remembering the whispers she had heard in the court. "They spoke of a prophecy." Kael turned to look at her, and his expression was unreadable. "Yes, a prophecy about an Omega born without a wolf, without status, without pack. One who carries a dormant mark. One who will either destroy the Moonline bloodline or save it." "And you think I am this Omega?" "I think you are something I do not understand." He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if holding himself back by force of will. I think Lord Varen believes you are a threat to everything he holds dear, and he will not stop until you are dead or exiled. I think my wolf has chosen you in a way that defies logic and reason, and I think you have secrets that even you do not know you carry." Lyra felt her heart beating faster, felt her wolf stirring again in response to his proximity. "What do you want from me?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was silent for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face for something she could not name. "I want," he said finally, "to understand what is happening. To know if this bond is real, or if it is some trick of ancient magic. To determine if you are indeed the Omega of prophecy, and if so, what that means for my kingdom and my people." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was softer. "And I want, for the first time in 15 years, to believe that there might be something worth fighting for beyond duty and obligation." The honesty of his words struck her harder than any weapon could. She saw the man beneath the crown, the warrior beneath the king, the wounded soul who had lost someone he loved and never recovered. She recognized that pain. She carried the same weight. "I cannot promise you anything," she said. "I do not know what I am or what the blood means. I have spent 14 years trusting no one, and that will not change overnight." "I know." He nodded once, accepting her words without argument. "But I am asking you to stay. To let me investigate this bond, to let me discover the truth of your bloodline and the prophecy, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. You would have freedom to move within the palace, to leave if you choose, to walk away from all of this, if that is what you decide. And if I stay, then we face what comes next together." His voice was steady now, the voice of a king making a proposal. "Lord Varen will not stop. He has evidence that your bloodline may be connected to ancient enemies of the crown, and he believes killing you is the only way to protect the kingdom. If you stay, you will be in danger." "I have been in danger every day of my life," Lyra said. "That is not new." The ghost of a smile crossed his face, so brief she might have imagined it. "No, I do not suppose it is." He turned to leave, his hand reaching for the door, and then he stopped. "My wolf," he said without looking at her. "It has not spoken to me in 15 years. But when I saw you in the court, it said one word. Finally." He opened the door. "Good night, Lyra. We will speak again tomorrow." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the fire and the shadows and the echo of a word that changed everything. Finally, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after he left, her hands pressed together, her mind racing. The man who had walked into her room was not the cold king she had seen in the moon court. He was something more complicated, more wounded, more human. And her wolf, dormant for 28 years, had recognized him the same way his had recognized her. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if the prophecy was real, or if the bond would hold, or if Lord Varen would succeed in having her killed. She did not know anything, except that for the first time since she had been cast out of her pack, for the first time since she had learned to survive alone in the darkness of the Darkwood, she did not feel completely alone. It was terrifying. It was also perhaps the beginning of something. Outside her window, the moon rose full and silver over the palace of Obsidian Keep, and somewhere in the depths of her soul, a wolf that had been sleeping for 28 years lifted its head and began slowly to wake. The council chamber smelled of old stone and older grudges. Kael stood at the head of the long obsidian table, his hands clasped behind his back, his face carved into the expressionless mask he had worn for 20 years of rule. Around him sat the 7 elders of the moon court, their faces illuminated by the pale light filtering through windows set high in the vaulted ceiling. Each of them represented one of the 7 provinces. Each of them held power enough to challenge kings, and each of them was watching him with the careful attention of predators assessing prey. Lord Aldrich Varen sat at the far end of the table, his silver hair gleaming like a crown of ice, his cold eyes fixed on Kael with an intensity that bordered on accusation. He had called this emergency session, had demanded that the council convene before the sun reached its zenith, and now he sat in patient silence, waiting for his moment to strike. Beside him, in a chair that should have been reserved for council members only, sat his daughter. Lady Morgana Ashford was everything that court painters loved to capture, tall and slender, with hair the color of midnight, and skin pale as winter moonlight. She wore silver armor even here in the council chamber, a statement of readiness, of capability, of the training she had undergone since childhood. Her eyes were the same cold gray as her father's, and they held the same calculating intelligence. She had been raised to be Luna. Everyone in the 7 provinces knew it. From the age of 5, she had been trained in combat, politics, etiquette, and the subtle arts of power. She had mastered the sword before she mastered reading. She had learned to navigate court intrigue before she learned to dance. Everything about her had been shaped and molded toward a single purpose: to stand beside the Alpha King as his mate and the mother of his heirs. And then Lyra had walked into the Moon Court and changed everything. Kael could feel Morgana's gaze on him now, could sense the fury that simmered beneath her carefully controlled exterior. She had spent her entire life preparing for a role that was now threatened by a stranger from the Darkwood. He did not blame her for her anger. He simply could not allow it to dictate his decisions. The chamber fell silent as Varen rose to his feet, a scroll clutched in his weathered hands. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries of tradition and the sharp edge of barely concealed triumph. Your Majesty, honored elders, I have called this session to present evidence of grave importance to the security of our realm. Evidence that the woman currently housed as a guest in the royal palace is not merely a lawbreaker, but a threat to the very existence of the Moonline itself. Murmurs rippled around the table. Kael remained still, but his wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, alert to danger it could sense but not yet see. Varen unrolled the scroll with deliberate ceremony, laying it flat on the table for all to see. The parchment was old, yellowed with age, covered in script that predated the current dynasty. 200 years ago, he began, a prophecy was spoken by the oracle of the first moon. It told of an Omega born without a wolf, without status, without pack. One who would carry a dormant mark of the bloodline, one who would either save the Moonline or destroy it utterly. This is known, Kael said flatly. You speak of nothing new. Varen's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. What is not widely known, Your Majesty, is that this prophecy has been fulfilled before. 200 years ago, an Omega matching this description appeared in the court of King Aldrich III. She claimed to be the salvation spoken of in prophecy. She charmed the king, infiltrated the palace, and when the time was right, she opened the gates to an army of traitors who nearly destroyed everything our ancestors had built. The murmurs became louder, more urgent. Kael felt a cold weight settling in his stomach, but his expression did not change. The civil war that followed, Varen continued, lasted 7 years. It claimed the lives of 3 generations of wolves, devastated 4 of the 7 provinces, and came within a single battle of ending the Moonline forever. The Omega who caused it all was eventually captured and executed, but the damage she had done could never be fully undone. He paused, letting his words sink into the consciousness of everyone present. And now, he said softly, another Omega appears, matching the same prophecy, carrying the same marks. And our king, he turned to look directly at Kael, welcomes her into the palace as an honored guest. The silence that followed was absolute. Kael met Varen's gaze without flinching. You speak of events 2 centuries past. You speak of one woman who betrayed the crown. You do not speak of this woman, or of any evidence that she intends the same. Do I not? Varen reached into his robes and withdrew a second document, this one sealed with wax that bore an ancient crest. This letter was found in the archives of the Shadowfang Pack, recovered by my agents after the woman Lyra was cast out. It details the bloodline of her mother, traced back through generations to a single ancestor. He broke the seal and spread the letter on the table. The traitor Omega who nearly destroyed us 200 years ago had a daughter. That daughter was hidden, smuggled out of the capital before the execution, raised in secret among a minor pack in the Northern Territories. Her descendants have lived among us ever since, their true heritage concealed, waiting. Varen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lyra is a direct descendant of the woman who almost ended the Moonline. The blood of traitors runs in her veins. The same prophecy that spoke of destruction has brought her to our door, and our king's wolf has chosen to bond with her. The chamber erupted. Elders shouted over each other, some demanding immediate execution, others calling for investigation, still others arguing about the validity of ancient documents and the reliability of pack archives. Kael stood in the center of the storm, his mind racing behind his immobile face. He had suspected there was more to Lyra's story than she knew. He had sensed secrets buried deep in her blood. mysteries that even she could not access. But this, a direct connection to the greatest betrayal in the history of his people, this changed everything. Or did it? His wolf growled within him, not with fear or uncertainty, but with protective fury. Whatever Lyra's ancestors had done, whatever blood she carried, she was not responsible for sins committed centuries before her birth. She had lived alone in the Darkwood for 14 years, struggling to survive with no knowledge of prophecies or bloodlines or ancient treachery. She was innocent of everything except the accident of her heritage. But innocence, Kael knew, rarely mattered to men like Varen. General Theron rose from his seat near the wall, where he had been observing in silence. His voice cut through the chaos with the authority of a man who had commanded armies. Enough! He waited until the shouting subsided before continuing. Lord Varen presents evidence that deserves investigation, but evidence of ancestry is not evidence of intent. The woman has committed no crime beyond saving the life of a royal guard. We cannot execute her for the actions of an ancestor she never knew. We can execute her to prevent the prophecy from being fulfilled, Varen countered. Prevention is better than cure, General. Surely you of all people understand that. I understand that we are wolves, not murderers. Theron's voice was cold. If we kill an innocent woman based on nothing but fear of what she might become, we are no better than the enemies we have fought for generations. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Kael watched the faces of the elders, reading the calculations happening behind their eyes. They were weighing options, measuring risks, determining which side of this conflict would best serve their own interests. Finally, Elder Morath of the Eastern Province spoke. Her voice was thin with age but sharp with intelligence. There is a middle path. The Luna trials exist precisely for situations where the worthiness of a potential mate must be tested. Let the woman undergo the trials. If she passes, we will know she is meant to stand beside the king. If she fails, she dies, and the prophecy is prevented, without the stain of unlawful execution on our hands. Murmurs of agreement spread around the table. Even Varen could not object to a solution that gave him what he wanted while maintaining the appearance of fairness. Kael spoke for the first time since Varen had presented his evidence. The trials are designed for noble-born wolves trained from childhood in combat and politics. Lyra has had no such training. Then she will fail, Varen said smoothly, and the problem solves itself. Or, Elder Morath added, she will prove herself worthy through sheer strength of will. That is the purpose of the trials, is it not? To test not just skill but character? Morgana shifted in her seat. When she spoke, her voice was honey over steel. If the council permits, she said, I would offer my services as the champion for the final trial. Blood and bone requires a worthy opponent. Let me face this pretender and prove whether she deserves to stand where I was meant to stand. The offer hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Kael saw the trap immediately. Morgana was one of the finest warriors in the 7 provinces, trained specifically to defeat opponents in ritual combat. Placing her against Lyra would be little different from execution, simply slower and more painful. But he could not refuse without appearing to doubt Lyra's abilities, without suggesting that she needed his protection to survive. The council will consider your offer, he said carefully. The decision will be made when the time comes. Morgana inclined her head, but her eyes never left his face, and the smile that touched her lips held no warmth at all. I will be ready whenever I am called. Kael looked around the table, seeing the trap that had been laid for him. If he refused the trials, he would be seen as protecting the descendant of a traitor, placing his personal desires above the safety of the realm. If he accepted, he was sending Lyra into challenges designed to kill her. There was only one choice that preserved both her life and his honor. I will train her myself, he said. The silence that followed was deafening. Your Majesty, Varen began, that is unprecedented. A king does not personally train a trial candidate. It suggests favoritism, bias, and abandonment of the impartiality that the trials require. The trials require that the candidate be given a fair chance to succeed, Kael replied evenly. Lyra has survived alone in the Darkwood for 14 years. She has skills that none of your noble-born candidates possess. But she lacks knowledge of palace combat, of our specific traditions and techniques. I will teach her what she needs to know, nothing more, nothing less. And if she still fails, then she fails. Kael's voice was hard as iron. But she will fail because she was not strong enough, not because she was never given the chance to succeed. Varen's eyes narrowed, but he could find no ground on which to object. The motion was put to a vote, and by a narrow margin, the council approved the trials. As the elders filed out of the chamber, Kael caught Varen watching him with an expression that promised this was far from over. Morgana walked beside her father, her silver armor catching the light, her posture perfect, her face revealing nothing of the thoughts that surely churned beneath. She paused at the door and looked back at Kael, and in that moment he saw something beyond anger in her eyes. He saw determination. He saw patience. He saw the absolute certainty that she would eventually get what she wanted. She would be a formidable enemy. She had always been formidable. But he had made his choice, and he would not waver from it. General Theron appeared at Kael's side. "You know what you are doing," he said quietly. "I know what I must do," Kael replied. "Whether it is wise is another matter entirely." The library of Obsidian Keep was a cathedral of knowledge, its walls lined with shelves that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Scrolls and books and ancient tablets filled every available space, containing the accumulated wisdom of 7 generations of wolf kings and the secrets of 1,000 years of history. Lyra stood at the center of this vast repository, her head tilted back to take in the scope of it. She had spent 14 years in a forest where knowledge meant tracking game and reading weather signs. This place was as foreign to her as the palace itself. Kael watched her from the doorway, noting the way her eyes moved from shelf to shelf, cataloging, assessing. Even in a place of learning, she thought like a hunter. "You wanted to know about your bloodline," he said, stepping into the room. "This is where the answers live." She turned to face him, her amber eyes guarded but curious. "The council met this morning. I heard the shouting from my window. Varen believes you are the descendant of a traitor who nearly destroyed the kingdom 2 centuries ago. He has documents that support his claim." Lyra absorbed this information without visible reaction. "And you? What do you believe?" "I believe that bloodline does not determine destiny. I believe that the sins of ancestors should not be inherited by descendants who had no part in them. And I believe," he added quietly, "that my wolf would not have chosen you if you carried destruction in your heart." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You trust your wolf that much?" "I trust nothing else as much." He moved to one of the reading tables, where a stack of documents had been prepared by the palace archivists. "But the council has demanded proof. You will undergo the Luna trials, tests designed to determine whether you are worthy to stand beside the king. If you pass, the prophecy is considered fulfilled in the direction of salvation. If you fail, you die." "And the alternative?" "There is no alternative." Kael's voice was flat with resignation. "Varen has made certain of that. Either you prove yourself through the trials, or you are executed as a threat to the realm." Lyra walked to the table and looked down at the documents spread across its surface. "Genealogies," she said. "Bloodline records. Someone has been researching my family." The archivists worked through the night. Kael joined her at the table, close enough that he could smell the pine and wilderness that still clung to her despite days in the palace. "What they found confirms Varen's claims. Your mother was a descendant of the traitor Omega, hidden among the Shadowfang pack for generations." "My mother." Lyra's voice softened slightly, the first crack in her armor that Kael had seen since the night before. "She never told me. Perhaps she did not know, or perhaps she kept the secret to protect you." "Protect me?" Lyra laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "She watched them brand me and cast me out. She did nothing to stop it." Kael was silent for a moment, weighing his next words carefully. "When my sister died, I blamed myself. I was 3 days right away, fighting a war that I thought was more important than protecting my own family. If I had been there, if I had paid more attention to the intelligence reports, if I had anticipated the ambush, she might still be alive." Lyra turned to look at him, and her eyes held a pain that mirrored his own. "I have carried that guilt for 15 years, he continued. "It silenced my wolf, broke something inside me that I thought could never be repaired. But I have come to understand that guilt is not the same as responsibility. I did not kill Sarah. The enemy killed her, just as you did not betray the Moonline. An ancestor you never knew betrayed it. You are telling me to forgive my mother. I am telling you that the past is a chain we choose to wear or choose to break." He reached out and touched the documents on the table, the paper evidence of centuries of hidden shame. "Whatever your bloodline contains, you are not bound by it. You have spent 14 years proving that you are more than what others believed you to be. The trials will be another opportunity to prove the same thing. Lyra was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant, seeing things that Kael could not perceive. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. My mother used to tell me stories when I was small, before the moon trial, before everything changed. She told me about wolves who walked alone, who found their own paths through the darkness. I thought they were just fairy tales. Now I wonder if she was trying to prepare me for what she knew was coming. Perhaps she was. Kael moved closer, and when Lyra did not retreat, he allowed himself to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching. Perhaps she knew that the blood you carry would mark you for a difficult path, and she wanted you to know that others had walked it before and survived. Lyra turned her head to look at him, and their faces were very close, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, the tiny scar at the corner of her mouth that he had not noticed before. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could let Varen have his way. You could protect yourself and your throne by sacrificing me. Why risk everything for a stranger?" Kael considered the question with the same careful attention he gave to every strategic decision. There were political answers he could give, diplomatic explanations about the importance of justice and the dangers of ruling through fear. All of them would be true, and none of them would be the real reason. "Because my wolf chose you," he said finally. "And for the first time in 15 years, I feel like I might be able to choose something for myself, not for duty or obligation or the expectations of others, just for me." The words hung between them, honest and raw and terrifying in their simplicity. Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his forearm, a gesture so unexpected that it sent a shock of warmth through his entire body. Her touch was light, tentative, as if she was not quite sure she had the right to offer comfort. "Then we are both choosing," she said quietly, "for the first time in our lives." They stood together in the silence of the ancient library, surrounded by the weight of history and the whisper of possibilities, and neither of them pulled away. The training grounds of Obsidian Keep had witnessed the forging of warriors for 300 years. The stone was stained with old blood, the air thick with the memory of countless clashes of steel. Here, princes had learned to fight and generals had honed their skills. And here, for the first time in the history of the kingdom, a king was personally training an Omega for the Luna trials. Lyra moved through the forms that Kael had taught her, her body flowing from stance to stance with a grace that came from 14 years of survival rather than formal instruction. She was not elegant in the way of palace-trained fighters. She was efficient, brutal, focused entirely on effectiveness rather than appearance. Kael watched from this edge of the training circle, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes tracking every movement she made. 3 days of intensive training had revealed what he had suspected from the beginning. She was a natural warrior, her instincts honed by constant danger, her reflexes sharpened by countless encounters with predators far more dangerous than any palace opponent. She was also stubborn, quick-tempered, and absolutely unwilling to accept any criticism without questioning it first. "You are dropping your left shoulder," he called out as she completed a series of strikes. "It leaves you open to a counter from the low angle." Lyra paused, breathing hard, sweat glistening on her skin despite the cold morning air. "In the forest, I fight things that attack from above. Bears, wildcats. Low angles are not a priority. In the trials, you will fight wolves who have been trained since childhood to exploit exactly that weakness." Kael stepped into the circle, drawing his practice sword in one smooth motion. "Again. This time, I will show you what happens when you drop that shoulder." They fought, not with the controlled precision of a training exercise, but with the intensity of warriors who understood that every lesson might mean life or death. Kael did not hold back, did not soften his blows or slow his movements out of misplaced gentleness. She would receive no such mercy in the trials, and treating her as fragile would only get her killed. Lyra matched him strike for strike, her smaller frame compensating with speed and unpredictability. She learned quickly, adapting to his attacks, incorporating corrections almost as soon as he pointed them out. By the time the morning sun had climbed to its zenith, she had stopped dropping her shoulder entirely. They broke for water, both of them breathing hard, steam rising from their heated bodies in the cold air. Kael handed her a cup and watched as she drank deeply, her throat working, her eyes never stopping their constant surveillance of the surrounding area. "You fight like someone who expects attack from every direction," he observed, I fight like someone who has been attacked from every direction." She lowered the cup and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "The Darkwood does not care about fair fights or warning signals. Neither did my pack when they decided I was worthless. Your pack was wrong." The words came out more forcefully than Kael had intended, and Lyra looked at him with surprise. They looked at a child whose wolf had not awakened and saw only what was absent. They did not see the strength that was already present. Lyra was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "No one has ever said that to me before." "Then everyone you have known has been a fool." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Including you?" "Especially me." Kael set down his own cup and picked up his practice sword again. "I spent 15 years refusing to feel anything because feeling hurt too much. That is its own kind of foolishness. Now again, the trial is in 4 days, and you are not ready." They trained until the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, until Lyra's arms trembled with exhaustion, and even Kael felt the burn of overworked muscles. By the time they finally stopped, the training grounds were empty, except for the two of them, the palace guards having long since learned to give the king and his unusual student a wide berth. From the shadows of a colonnade overlooking the training grounds, Lady Morgana watched them with eyes that missed nothing. She had been observing for hours, studying Lyra's movements, cataloging her strengths and weaknesses, preparing for the confrontation that she knew was coming. The Omega was skilled, Morgana had to admit, raw and untrained in formal technique, but possessed of instincts that could not be taught. She moved like a predator, fought like someone who had faced death so many times it no longer held any fear for her. But skill was not enough. Morgana had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. She knew every form, every counter, every technique that existed in the 7 provinces. She had trained under the greatest masters, had defeated opponents who should have been her superiors, had honed herself into the perfect weapon. And she had one advantage that Lyra did not. She had the alpha call. No one knew how she had developed it. The ability was supposed to be limited to the ruling bloodlines, but Morgana had awakened it at 16, had learned to wield it in secret, had used it to dominate opponents who thought themselves her equals. Lyra would never see it coming. Morgana smiled in the shadows and slipped away to continue her own preparations. "The first trial," Kael said as they walked back toward the palace, "is called the Hunt. You will be sent into the Darkwood alone and given 24 hours to bring back a kill worthy of a Luna. The challenge is not the hunting itself, which you know better than any noble-born candidate. The challenge is that others will be hunting you." Lyra nodded, unsurprised. "Varen will not simply wait for me to fail on my own. No, he will send men to ensure your failure. Assassins disguised as bandits, most likely. Deniable, impossible to trace back to him, but no less deadly for that. And you cannot protect me without compromising the integrity of the trial." Kael stopped walking, and when she turned to face him, his expression was grave. "I will do what I must to keep you alive. If that compromises the trial, so be it. I did not bring you this far to lose you to a coward's ambush." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for something he could not name. "You care," she said quietly. "Despite everything, despite the politics and the danger and the prophecy, you actually care whether I live or die." "Yes, the admission cost him nothing, and it cost him everything. I care." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough that his wolf stirred with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Then I will try not to die," she said softly, "for both our sakes." The Darkwood was different at dawn. Lyra moved through the familiar territory with ease, her body falling into patterns carved by 14 years of survival. The trees rose around her like ancient sentinels, their branches blocking out all but scattered fragments of the pale morning sky. The trees rose around her like ancient sentinels, their branches interlocking overhead to block out all but scattered fragments of the pale morning sky. The ground was soft with decades of fallen leaves, muffling her footsteps as she tracked the signs that only a true hunter could read. She had been in the forest for 12 hours, and she had found her quarry within the first 3. The great stag was the largest she had ever seen, its antlers spreading like the branches of a young tree, its coat the deep gray of winter clouds. It had taken her most of the night to track it to its bedding ground, and another hour to position herself for the perfect strike. When she finally brought it down, it was with a single arrow through the heart, clean and quick, the kind of death that honored both hunter and prey. Now she was making her way back toward the palace, the stag's body secured to a makeshift travois she had constructed from fallen branches. It was heavy work, but she had done harder things in her years alone. She would complete the trial, present her kill to the council, and prove that she was worthy of whatever fate awaited her. She had almost reached the edge of the Darkwood when she heard them. 3 sets of footsteps, moving with the deliberate quiet of trained hunters, approaching from different angles in a pattern designed to cut off escape. Lyra lowered the travois and reached for her bow in one smooth motion, an arrow nocked and ready before the first of them emerged from the shadows. They were wearing the rough clothing of bandits, their faces hidden behind cloth masks, but their movements betrayed them. These were not desperate criminals looking for an easy target. These were trained killers, moving with the precision of soldiers, their weapons held with the casual familiarity of men who had used them many times before. Varen's assassins, just as Kael had predicted. "The woman is alone," one of them said, his voice muffled by his mask. "This should be quick." Lyra did not respond with words. She responded with an arrow that took him through the throat before he could finish drawing his sword. The other 2 attacked immediately, abandoning any pretense of coordination in favor of raw aggression. Lyra dropped her bow and drew her hunting knife, meeting their charge with the ferocity of a cornered wolf. She was smaller than both of them, weaker in terms of pure physical strength, but she had survived the Darkwood for 14 years by being faster, smarter, and more willing to do whatever was necessary to stay alive. She killed the second assassin with a slash across his femoral artery, dancing away from his desperate counterstrike as his life poured out onto the forest floor. The third was more cautious, circling her with the patience of a predator who knew that time was on his side. "You fight well for a hollow shell," he said. "It will be a shame to waste such skill." Lyra said nothing. She had learned long ago that talking during combat was a luxury she could not afford. He came at her fast, faster than she had anticipated, and his blade opened a gash along her left arm before she could fully evade. The pain was sharp and immediate, but she had felt worse. She had survived worse. She twisted away from his follow-up strike and drove her knife toward his exposed side. He blocked it, barely, and for a moment they were locked together, straining against each other's strength, their faces inches apart. "Lord Varen sends his regards," the assassin hissed, and then his eyes went wide, and he looked down at the sword point emerging from his chest. Kael withdrew his blade in one smooth motion, and the assassin crumpled to the ground, dead before he finished falling. Lyra stared at the king, her heart pounding, blood dripping from her wounded arm onto the leaf-covered forest floor. "You followed me," she said. "I never left." Kael cleaned his sword on the assassin's clothing, his movements methodical, almost casual. "There was a time when I might have let you face this alone to preserve the integrity of the trial. That time has passed. The council will say you interfered. They will say the trial is invalid. Let them." He sheathed his sword and moved toward her, his eyes fixed on the wound on her arm. Let Varen explain why his assassins were in the Darkwood wearing bandit masks. Let him justify sending 3 trained killers after an unarmed woman. The trial may be compromised, but his treachery is now exposed. He reached for her arm, and Lyra let him take it. Let him examine the wound with the careful attention of a man who had dressed countless injuries on countless battlefields. "It is not deep," he said. "It will heal cleanly if we tend to it properly. I know. She had evaluated the wound herself. I have survived worse. I know." He looked up at her, and his silver eyes held something she had not seen before. "Pride. You killed 2 of them before I could reach you. Most trained soldiers could not have done the same. Most trained soldiers have not spent 14 years fighting for their lives every single day." The ghost of a smile crossed his face, and he reached into his belt pouch for a strip of clean cloth to bind her wound. "No, they have not." He wrapped her arm with quick, efficient movements, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his hands. "You have completed the trial. The stag is more than worthy, and you have proven that you can face any challenge the Darkwood presents, including assassination attempts from members of the council, including those." He finished binding her wound and released her arm, but he did not step back. "Lyra, what happened here changes nothing about the prophecy or the trials that remain, but it changes everything about what I am willing to accept from my own counsel." She looked at him, at this man who had gone from stranger to protector to something she did not have a name for, and she felt her wolf stir within her, stronger than before, responding to his presence with an intensity that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. "You could have let them kill me," she said quietly. "Your problems would have been solved." "My problems would have multiplied." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture so tender that made her breath catch. "And I would have lost something I am only beginning to understand I cannot live without." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and more dangerous than any blade. Lyra reached up and placed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. "Whatever this is," she said, "whatever the bond means, whatever the prophecy says, I am not running from it anymore." "Neither am I." They stood together in the bloody clearing as the sun set over the Darkwood, two wounded souls who had found something unexpected in each other, something that might be strong enough to survive whatever storms were coming. The stag was forgotten, the dead assassins were forgotten. For one long moment, there was nothing in the world but the two of them and the choice they were making together. Then Kael stepped back, his expression shifting back to the controlled mask of a king. "We need to return to the palace," he said. "Varen must answer for what happened here, and you need rest before the final trial." Lyra nodded, accepting the return to practicality, but something had changed between them. Something that could not be unsaid or undone. They gathered the stag, collected what evidence they could from the dead assassins, and began the long walk back to Obsidian Keep. Neither of them spoke during the journey, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full. The confrontation with Varen took place in the king's private chambers, far from the ears of curious courtiers and scheming nobles. Kael had sent for the elder immediately upon returning to the palace, and Varen had come with the confident stride of a man who believed himself untouchable. That confidence lasted exactly as long as it took for him to see the bodies of his assassins laid out on the chamber floor. "Explain," Kael said, his voice soft with controlled fury. Varen's face went pale, but he recovered quickly, his expression smoothing into careful neutrality. "I have no idea who these men are or why they were in the Darkwood. They carried weapons forged in your provincial smithy. They wore boots made by your personal cobbler. And one of them, before he died, sent your regards to the woman he was trying to kill." "Circumstantial," Varen said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Anyone could obtain weapons from my province. Anyone could wear boots from my cobbler. Anyone could," Kael agreed. "But not anyone did. These men did. And they died trying to murder a candidate in the Luna trials, a crime that carries the penalty of death under laws you yourself helped to write." Varen's composure cracked just for a moment, and Kael saw the fear beneath the arrogance. The elder was not afraid of death. He was afraid of failure, of losing the power he had spent a lifetime accumulating. "I acted to protect the realm," Varen said finally. "The prophecy is clear. That woman will either save us or destroy us. I chose to ensure she could do neither. You chose to become the very thing you claim to be protecting us from." Kael stepped closer, and his wolf rose in his eyes, silver and cold and absolutely merciless. "You chose treachery and murder. You chose to violate the sacred laws of the trials. You chose to become a traitor. I chose to be a patriot when my king was too blind to see the danger in front of him." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Kael considered simply killing the man where he stood. It would be within his rights. It would be justified. It would be exactly what Varen deserved. But it would also prove that Kael was the kind of king who ruled through violence and fear, the kind of king that Varen had always believed him to be. "You will be confined to your quarters until the trials are complete," Kael said finally. "Your vote on the council is suspended. Your agents will be rounded up and questioned. And when this is over, you will stand trial for attempted murder." Varen's face twisted with something between rage and desperation. "You cannot do this. I have allies. I have support. The council will not allow you to remove one of their own on the word of a hollow shell Omega. The council will do as they are told, or they will join you in the dungeons." Kael gestured to the guards waiting at the door. "Take him, and make sure he has no opportunity to communicate with anyone outside his chambers." As the guards dragged Varen away, the elder's composure finally shattered completely. "This is not over," he shouted. "The prophecy will be fulfilled one way or another. You cannot stop what is coming, Kael. You cannot protect her forever." The door slammed shut, cutting off his words, and Kael stood alone in his chambers, surrounded by the bodies of dead assassins and the weight of choices he had never wanted to make. General Theron found him there an hour later, still standing in the same position, still staring at the door through which his enemy had disappeared. "It had to be done," the general said quietly. "I know. She is worth it. Kael turned to look at his oldest friend, and for the first time in 15 years, there was something like hope in his silver eyes. "I am beginning to believe she might be," he said. "I am beginning to believe many things I had given up on long ago." Theron nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with something that might have been approval. Sarah would have liked her. The words struck Kael like a physical blow, but not in the way they would have even a month ago. Instead of pain, he felt something like warmth, like a door opening that had been closed for too long. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think she would have." That night, Kael went to Lyra's chambers. He did not go to train, or to plan, or to discuss strategy for the trial that remained. He went simply to be with her, to sit in her presence, to feel the bond between them pulse with a warmth that had nothing to do with prophecy or politics. They talked for hours. She told him about the Darkwood, about the creatures she had hunted, and the shelters she had built. He told her about Sarah, about the guilt he carried, about the silence of his wolf. They did not touch. They did not need to. When the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Kael rose to leave. The final trial was scheduled for the following day, and both of them needed rest. But at the door, he paused and turned back to look at her. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know something." She waited, her amber eyes steady on his face. "I am not fighting for you because of the bond," he said quietly. "I am not protecting you because of the prophecy. I am doing these things because you are worth fighting for. You are worth protecting. Not because of what you might become, but because of who you already are." Lyra rose from her chair and crossed the room to stand before him. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "That is the first time anyone has ever said that to me." "Then I will say it again," he replied, "as many times as you need to hear it." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers light against his cheek, and he closed his eyes and let himself feel it, really feel it, for the first time in 15 years. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we face whatever comes together." Together, he agreed, and he left her chambers carrying something he had not possessed in a very long time: hope. The morning of the final trial arrived wrapped in mist and silence. Lyra had not slept. She had spent the night in meditation, reaching inward to the place where her wolf stirred in its long dormancy, trying to understand the creature that had been sealed away since before her birth. She had felt it more strongly since Kael had called to it through the bond, felt it pressing against the barriers that held it captive, yearning for freedom with an intensity that made her bones ache. Soon she had promised it, soon. Now she stood at the entrance to the arena, watching servants carry torches to their positions along the walls, watching guards take their places at every exit, watching the early arrivals filter into the galleries with the eager anticipation of spectators at a blood sport. General Theron found her there, his weathered face creased with concern. "You should eat something," he said gruffly. "You will need your strength. I have survived on less." Lyra did not look away from the arena. "What I need is information. Who am I fighting?" Theron was silent for a moment, and that silence told her more than words could have. "Lady Morgana Ashford," he said finally. "The council chose her last night. She has been training for this moment since she was a child." Lyra absorbed this information without visible reaction. Morgana was everything she was not. Noble-born, formally trained, possessed of a wolf that had awakened on schedule and been honed into a weapon. She was also, according to the rumors that filtered through the palace, possessed of abilities that should have been impossible for an Omega. "The Alpha Call," Lyra said. "She has it." Theron nodded grimly. "No one knows how. Some say her bloodline carries traces of the old ruling families. Others say she made bargains with powers that should not be bargained with. Whatever the truth, she has used it to defeat opponents who should have been her superiors." Lyra finally turned to look at him, and there was no fear in her amber eyes. "Then I will have to find a way to resist it." The arena of blood and bone had not seen combat in 17 years. It sat in the heart of Obsidian Keep, like a wound that had never fully healed. A circular pit, carved from black stone, and surrounded by tiered galleries that could hold 1,000 witnesses. The floor was smooth with centuries of use, stained in places by blood that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows across the faces of the nobles who had gathered to watch history unfold. Lyra stood at the eastern entrance, her hand resting on the hilt of the sword Kael had given her, her eyes fixed on the gate at the opposite end of the arena where her opponent would emerge. The armor she wore was light, designed for speed rather than protection, and it fit her body like a second skin. She had refused the ceremonial plate that tradition demanded, choosing instead the practical leather and chain that had kept her alive in the Darkwood. The crowd murmured with disapproval and fascination in equal measure. She did not care what they thought. She had stopped caring about the opinions of others the night her pack had cast her out into the snow and expected her to die. Everything she had accomplished since then had been in defiance of what others believed she could do. This trial would be no different. The horn sounded, deep and resonant, echoing off the stone walls and silencing the crowd. The gate at the far end of the arena began to rise, chains rattling, metal groaning, and Lyra felt her muscles tense with anticipation. She had expected a warrior. She had prepared for a warrior. What she got was Lady Morgana Ashford. The noblewoman emerged from the shadows like a predator stepping into sunlight, her silver armor gleaming, her dark hair bound back from a face that was beautiful and cold and utterly without mercy. She carried a sword that had been forged for killing, not ceremony, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had trained since childhood for exactly this moment. Morgana smiled as she approached the center of the arena, and there was nothing pleasant in the expression. "The hollow shell," she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the galleries. "The descendant of traitors. I wondered when we would finally meet properly." Lyra said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were weapons, and she would not give her opponent ammunition. The elder who presided over the trial raised his staff, his voice ringing out across the arena with ritual formality. "The trial of blood and bone is a test of combat and character. The combatants will fight until one yields, is unable to continue, or is killed. There are no other rules. May the moon witness and judge." He brought the staff down with a crack that echoed like thunder. The fight began. Morgana attacked immediately, her sword singing through the air in a blur of silver death. She was faster than Lyra had anticipated, more skilled than the reports had suggested, and within the first 3 exchanges, Lyra understood that she was facing someone who had been bred and trained specifically to kill. She blocked, parried, gave ground strategically, her mind racing through the combat techniques Kael had taught her. Morgana pressed the advantage, her blade seeking the gaps in Lyra's defense with surgical precision. "He does not love you," Morgana hissed as their swords locked together. "The bond is nothing but instinct, animal attraction. He will tire of you as soon as the novelty fades." Lyra disengaged and countered with a strike toward Morgana's exposed flank. The noblewoman deflected it easily, but she had to give ground to do so, and Lyra pressed forward with 3 more rapid attacks. "You think you can take my place?" Morgana continued, her voice sharp with contempt even as she fought. "I was raised to be his Luna. I was trained for this from the moment I could hold a sword. You are nothing but a wild animal pretending to be worthy of a crown." Lyra did not respond with words. She responded with a feint that drew Morgana's guard high, followed by a kick to the knee that sent the noblewoman stumbling. But Morgana recovered faster than expected, spinning away and resetting her stance with barely a pause. They circled each other, breathing hard, searching for weaknesses. Up in the galleries, Lyra could feel Kael watching. She did not look for him, did not allow herself to be distracted, but she could sense his presence through the bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. He was worried. He was proud. He was fighting the urge to intervene with every fiber of his being. She would not give him reason to. Morgana attacked again, and this time there was something different in her movements, something that went beyond physical combat. A pressure built in the air around them, invisible but undeniable, and Lyra felt it press against her chest like a hand trying to force her to the ground. The Alpha Call. It was a rare gift, the ability to project dominance in a way that forced lesser wolves to submit. Morgana should not have been able to use it. She was an Omega, not an Alpha, and the call was supposed to be impossible for anyone outside the ruling bloodlines. But impossible or not, Lyra felt her knees begin to buckle. "Kneel," Morgana commanded, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated with something deep in Lyra's blood. "Kneel before your better hollow shell. Show everyone what you truly are." Lyra's muscles locked. Her sword trembled in her grip. The world narrowed to the crushing weight of dominance pressing down on her, demanding submission, demanding surrender. She had felt this before, once, when she was 14 years old and her pack had surrounded her and demanded that she shift, that she prove herself worthy of belonging, that she become something she could not become. She had felt the pressure of their collective will, the weight of their expectations, the crushing certainty that she was not enough. She had broken that night. She had shattered under the weight and been cast out into the darkness to die. But she had not died. She had survived. She had grown strong in ways her pack could never have imagined. She had become something more than what they expected, more than what anyone expected, and she would not break again. Not now, not ever. Lyra closed her eyes. The arena disappeared. The crowd disappeared. Morgana and her impossible call disappeared. Everything fell away except the darkness behind Lyra's eyes and the silence that had lived there for 28 years. She reached inward, deeper than she had ever reached before, searching for the wolf that had been sealed away since before her birth. For 28 years she had believed it dead or absent, a void where her beast should have been. For 28 years she had defined herself by its absence. But Kael had shown her that absence was not the same as death. Silence was not the same as emptiness. Sometimes the things we believe are gone are simply waiting for permission to return. In the depths of her soul, something stirred. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper, a growl so quiet it might have been imagined. But it was there. It was real. And it was angry. 28 years, the wolf seemed to say, though not in words. 28 years of silence. 28 years of waiting. You kept me locked away because you believed their lies about what you were, but I never left you. I was always here. The pressure of Morgana's call pressed harder, demanding submission. But now there was something pushing back. Lyra felt her wolf rise within her, felt it strain against the bonds that had held it captive for nearly 3 decades, felt it reach toward the light with desperate hunger. And then she felt something else. Kael. Not his physical presence, not his voice, not anything she could have described in ordinary terms. But she felt him through the bond, felt his wolf reaching toward hers across the distance between them, felt him offering something she had never received from anyone in her entire life. Permission, not a command, not a demand, not an expectation that she become something specific or behave in a particular way. Just permission to be whatever she truly was, to become whatever she needed to become, to let the wolf inside her finally breathe. "Wake up," she thought she heard him say, though no sound reached her ears. "I am here. You are not alone anymore. Wake up." And her wolf woke. The transformation was not dramatic. There was no explosion of light, no thunderous howl, no supernatural display of power. There was only a quiet settling, like a key turning in a lock, like a door opening that had been closed for far too long. Lyra opened her eyes. They were gold. The call that had been crushing her shattered like glass against stone. She rose to her feet in one smooth motion, her movements different now, more fluid, more certain, filled with a power she had never felt before. Her wolf was not separate from her anymore. It was her, had always been her, and now they moved together with the unity of a soul finally made whole. Morgana staggered backward, her face pale with shock. "That is impossible," she breathed. "Your wolf was sealed. The record said your wolf was dead." Lyra raised her sword. The records were wrong. She attacked. The fight that followed was nothing like what had come before. Lyra moved with a speed and precision that she had never possessed, her body responding to instincts that had been dormant for 28 years. Her wolf guided her strikes, anticipated Morgana's defenses, found openings that human eyes alone could never have seen. Morgana fought back with desperate fury, her earlier confidence crumbling in the face of an opponent who had transformed before her eyes. She called on the alpha power again and again, but each time it broke against the wall of Lyra's awakened will. "I was trained for this!" Morgana screamed as Lyra drove her backward across the arena. "I was chosen. I was worthy." "You were angry," Lyra replied, and her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You were lonely. You believed that you had to fight alone, that no one would help you, that the only way to survive was to destroy everyone who stood in your path." Their swords clashed one final time, and Lyra twisted her blade in a maneuver that sent Morgana's weapon spinning away across the stone floor. The noblewoman fell to her knees, defenseless, her eyes wide with terror as Lyra raised her sword for the killing blow. The arena fell silent. 1,000 witnesses held their breath. Lyra brought the sword down and stopped with the blade resting against Morgana's throat, drawing a thin line of blood but going no further. "I know what it is like to be alone," Lyra said quietly. I know what it is like to believe that no one will ever see you as worthy. I spent 14 years in that darkness, and it almost destroyed me." She stepped back, lowering her sword. "I could kill you. I have the right. But I choose not to, because I was you once, and someone gave me a chance to become something better." Morgana stared up at her, and for the first time, the hatred in her eyes flickered with something else. Confusion. Uncertainty. The first cracks in a wall that had been built over a lifetime. The elder's staff struck the ground. "The trial is concluded. The challenger yields. Lyra of the Darkwood has proven herself worthy." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some protesting, some simply staring in stunned disbelief at the Omega who had done the impossible. But Lyra heard none of it. Her attention was fixed on the figure descending from the royal gallery, moving through the chaos with the unstoppable certainty of a force of nature. She was aware of Morgana still kneeling on the arena floor, aware of the blood that dripped from the thin cut on the noblewoman's throat, aware of the 1,000 eyes watching her every move. But all of that seemed distant, unimportant, compared to the man walking toward her. General Theron moved to intercept him, speaking urgently, but Kael brushed past without breaking stride. Protocol demanded that he remain in the gallery until the trial was officially concluded. Tradition required that he maintain distance from the combatants until the elder pronounced judgment. He ignored all of it. Because some things were more important than protocol. Some things were more important than tradition. Some things demanded immediate acknowledgement, regardless of the consequences. Kael reached the arena floor and walked toward her, his silver eyes blazing, his wolf visible just beneath the surface of his skin. He stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. "You did it," he said. "We did it." She gestured toward her chest, toward the place where her wolf now rested, awake and alert, and finally at peace. "You called to her. You gave her permission to wake." "I gave her nothing." His voice was rough with emotion. "I simply told her what I have been trying to tell you since the moment we met, that she was worthy, that she was enough, that she deserved to exist." Lyra felt tears prick at her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Not here. Not in front of the crowd that was still watching their every move. Behind Kael, she could see the Council of Elders gathering, their faces a mixture of fury and fear. Lord Varen had been brought from his confinement to witness the trial, and his expression promised that this was far from over. "The wolf was sealed for a reason," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "Whatever dark magic she used to break that seal, it proves that she is exactly what I warned you about. She is the fulfillment of the prophecy of destruction." Kael turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made even Varen take a step backward. "The prophecy," Kael said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "says that she will either destroy the Moonline or save it. You have spent weeks trying to ensure the first outcome. You sent assassins to murder her in the Darkwood. You placed a champion against her with powers that should have been impossible to defeat. At every turn, you have pushed her toward the very fate you claim to fear." He walked toward the gathered elders, and his presence seemed to fill the arena, commanding attention, demanding respect. "But she did not become what you expected. She did not break under your pressure. She did not become a destroyer." He stopped directly in front of Varen. "She became something you never considered. She became a savior who chose mercy over vengeance. She became a warrior who could kill but chose not to. She became exactly what this kingdom needs." Varen's face contorted with rage. "You are blinded by the bond. You cannot see clearly what she represents." "I see more clearly than I have in 15 years. Kael turned away from him, turning back toward Lyra, and his voice dropped to something more intimate, more personal. "For 15 years, I have ruled this kingdom out of duty and obligation. For 15 years, I have gone through the motions of living without actually being alive. She woke something in me that I thought was dead forever. My wolf, my hope, my ability to believe in something beyond mere survival." He walked back to where Lyra stood, and the crowd fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "The prophecy says she will save or destroy. I choose to believe in salvation. I choose to believe in her." And then Kael Ravencrest, king of the 7 provinces, alpha of the Moon Court, the man who had never bowed to anyone in 20 years of rule, went to his knees before her. The sound that went through the crowd was not a gasp. It was something deeper, something more visceral, the collective intake of breath from 1,000 wolves who were witnessing something that had never happened before in all the history of their people. "I do not ask you to be my Luna," Kael said, looking up at her with silver eyes that held no pride, no arrogance, only truth. "I do not ask you to accept a position or a title or a role. I ask only for the chance to stand beside you, to prove that I am worthy of the bond we share, to earn what the moon has offered." Lyra looked down at him, at this powerful man who had set aside all his power to kneel before her, and she felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, not fear, something else entirely. For 28 years, she had believed herself worthless. For 28 years, she had fought alone, survived alone, defined herself by her solitude and her strength. She had never allowed herself to want anything beyond survival, because wanting led to disappointment, and disappointment led to despair. But this man, this king, had shown her something different. He had shown her that strength did not have to mean solitude. He had shown her that power did not have to mean dominion. He had shown her that even the mightiest wolf could choose to kneel, not in weakness, but in recognition of something greater than himself. She reached down and took his hands in hers. "Stand up," she said quietly. "Kings do not kneel, and I do not need anyone to kneel before me." She pulled him to his feet, and they stood face to face, equal in height, equal in will, equal in the choice they were making together. "If we do this," Lyra continued, "we do it as equals. Not king and consort, not alpha and omega. Two wolves who chose each other, walking the same path." Kael's hands tightened around hers. "That is all I have ever wanted." And there, in the arena where blood had been spilled for centuries, before 1,000 witnesses and a council of elders who did not know whether to cheer or protest, the bond between them settled into something permanent. There was no kiss, there was no dramatic declaration, there was only two people holding hands and looking at each other with the quiet certainty of wolves who had found their pack. The formal ceremonies took place 3 days later. They were not what tradition demanded. Lyra had refused the elaborate rituals that previous Lunas had endured, the symbolic submission, the oaths of obedience, the ceremonial transfer of authority from king to queen. Instead, she had worked with Kael and the more progressive members of the council to create something new, an oath of partnership. The days leading up to the ceremony had been filled with arguments and negotiations. The conservative elders had protested every change, citing centuries of precedent, warning of dire consequences if tradition was abandoned. Lyra had listened to their concerns with patience she had not known she possessed, and then she had calmly, firmly refused to compromise on the fundamental principles she believed in. "A Luna who must kneel before her king is not a partner," she had told them. "She is a subordinate, and I will not pretend to be something I am not." In the end, Kael had supported her on every point, using his authority as king to override the council's objections. It had cost him political capital, had damaged relationships with nobles who had been allies for decades, but he had not hesitated. "This is worth fighting for," he had told her in private. "You are worth fighting for. Whatever it costs, I pay it gladly." Now they stood together on the great balcony of Obsidian Keep, overlooking a crowd that had gathered from all 7 provinces to witness the event. The sun was setting behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the air was thick with anticipation. Lyra wore no crown. She had refused the traditional Luna diadem with its symbols of submission and secondary status. Instead, she had commissioned something new, a circlet of silver and iron, forged to match the one Kael wore, identical in every way. 2 rulers, 2 wolves, 2 halves of the same whole. Kael spoke first, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with the power of a king who had finally found something worth fighting for. "For 20 years I have ruled this kingdom alone. I have made decisions that affected millions of lives, carried burdens that no one else could share, walked a path that seemed to have no end and no companion. Today, that changes." He turned to face Lyra, and his silver eyes were soft with an emotion that the crowd had never seen in their cold king. "I take this woman as my partner, not because tradition demands it, not because prophecy foretold it, but because I choose her. Because she showed me that strength can coexist with mercy. Because she taught me that survival is not the same as living. Because she woke a part of me that I thought was dead forever." Lyra felt her wolf stir in response to his words, felt the bond between them pulse with warmth and certainty. She took a breath and spoke her own vows. "For 28 years, I believed I was worthless. I was told that I was empty, hollow, a shell without a spirit. I was cast out by everyone who should have protected me, left to survive alone in darkness that seemed to have no end. She looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of faces watching her with a mixture of hope and fear and curiosity. But I learned something in that darkness. I learned that the opinions of others do not define our worth. I learned that we can become more than what we were born to be. I learned that even the wolves who walk alone can find their pack, if they are brave enough to keep searching. She turned back to Kael. I take this man as my partner, not because the bond compels me, not because I have no other choice, but because I choose him. Because he saw worth in me when I could not see it in myself. Because he gave my wolf permission to wake. Because he showed me that even kings can learn to kneel. The elder who presided over the ceremony stepped forward, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes gleaming with something that might have been approval. By the authority of the Moon Court, by the traditions of our ancestors, and by the choice of these two wolves, I declare this bond recognized and this partnership sealed. May the moon witness and bless what has been joined here today. The crowd roared its approval, and the sound rolled across the landscape like thunder. But Lyra was not finished. She raised her hand, and the noise gradually subsided into expectant silence. She had requested this moment, had insisted on it despite the protests of the more conservative council members. There were things she needed to say, changes she needed to announce, and this was the moment to say them. I stand before you as your Luna, she began. But I do not stand here to rule over you. I stand here to fight for you. She let the words settle before continuing. I was cast out of my pack when I was 14 years old, because my wolf did not wake at the appointed time. I was branded as hollow, worthless, a failure. I spent 14 years surviving alone because no one believed I deserved to belong. Her voice grew stronger. That ends now. From this day forward, no wolf in the 7 provinces will be cast out simply because they are different. No child will be branded as worthless because their wolf takes longer to wake. No Omega will be treated as lesser simply because tradition says they should be. The crowd stirred, murmurs spreading through the ranks. Some faces showed approval. Others showed concern. A few showed outright hostility. Lyra did not care. I know that change is difficult. I know that tradition provides comfort and certainty in an uncertain world, but tradition that causes suffering is not worth preserving. Laws that destroy the innocent are not laws worth keeping. She looked toward the section of the crowd where the Council of Elders stood, their faces carefully blank. I am not asking you to abandon everything you believe. I am asking you to believe in something better. I am asking you to build a kingdom where every wolf has value, where every voice is heard, where no one has to survive alone simply because they were born different. Kael stepped forward to stand beside her, his presence a silent endorsement of everything she had said. The Luna has spoken, he declared, and I stand with her. These changes will not be easy, and they will not happen overnight. But they will happen, because a kingdom that sacrifices its own children to preserve tradition is not a kingdom worth preserving. He turned to face the council directly. Lord Varen will face a trial for his crimes, but he will not face execution. He acted out of genuine belief that he was protecting the realm, and while his methods were wrong, his intentions will be considered in his sentencing. A murmur of surprise went through the crowd. Many had expected the disgraced elder to be put to death for his assassination attempts. Lady Morgana Ashford will have her titles restored, Kael continued, if she chooses to accept them. She was a weapon forged by others, aimed at a target she did not choose. She deserves the chance to become something more. In the crowd, Lyra could see Morgana standing apart from the other nobles, her face unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, something that had not been there before the trial, a crack in the armor, a possibility of change. The ceremonies concluded as the sun finished its descent below the horizon, and the crowd began to disperse in the gathering darkness. Servants lit torches throughout the palace grounds, and the sound of celebration began to rise from the courtyards below. But Lyra did not join the festivities. She made her way to the highest balcony of Obsidian Keep, the one that overlooked the entire kingdom, and she stood alone in the cool night air, watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. Kael found her there an hour later. He did not speak at first, simply came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not quite touching. They had learned to be comfortable in silence together, to find communication in presence rather than words. Finally, Lyra spoke. "Do you ever wonder if we made the right choice?" "Every day," Kael replied honestly. Every decision I make, I wonder if there was a better path, a wiser option, a choice that would have caused less pain. That is the burden of leadership." Lyra nodded slowly. "The prophecy said I would destroy or save the moonline, but prophecies do not account for the complexity of reality. I could do both. I could save some while destroying others. I could try to help and fail. I could succeed in ways that I never intended." Kael turned to look at her, his silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do you regret accepting this burden?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I regret nothing. Whatever happens next, whatever challenges we face, I know that I made this choice with open eyes and a full heart. That is enough." She turned to face him, and in the darkness, with only the stars as witnesses, she allowed herself to show the vulnerability she kept hidden from the rest of the world. "But I am afraid," she admitted. "I have never been responsible for anyone but myself. Now I am responsible for millions. The weight of that is almost more than I can bear." Kael reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You do not bear it alone. That is the difference between survival and living. Survival is struggling alone against impossible odds. Living is finding others who will share the struggle with you." He stepped closer and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "For 15 years my wolf was silent because I believed I had to carry everything alone. You woke him not because of the bond, not because of the prophecy, but because you showed me that I did not have to be alone anymore. You showed me that strength means knowing when to ask for help." Lyra felt tears threaten again, and this time she let them come. Not many, not the flood that had been building for days, but enough to acknowledge the emotions she had been holding at bay. "I never asked for help," she said. "Not once in 14 years. I did not know how. Neither did I." Kael lifted his free hand and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "But we can learn together." They stood in silence for a long moment, two wolves who had spent their lives alone, finally finding the courage to lean on each other. When Lyra spoke again, her voice was stronger. "The prophecy is fulfilled," she said. "Whatever happens next is not written in any ancient text. Whatever we build from here is our own creation." "Yes," Kael agreed, "and I believe we will build something worth being proud of." A sound interrupted them, the cry of a raven, sharp and urgent in the night air. They both turned to see a dark shape descending from the sky, landing on the balcony railing with a flutter of black wings. It carried a message tube on its leg. Kael's expression hardened as he retrieved the message and broke the seal. His eyes scanned the contents, and Lyra saw his jaw tighten with each line. "What is it?" she asked, though she could already guess from his reaction. "The Northern Confederacy," he said, his voice flat with controlled anger. "They refuse to recognize our bond. They claim that a Luna with traitor blood cannot be accepted by the Council of Seven Kingdoms." Lyra absorbed this information without surprise. She had known that not everyone would accept the changes they were making. She had known that there would be resistance, opposition, perhaps even violence. She had also known that she would face it. "What do they want?" she asked. "They want me to annul the bond and choose a Luna from their royal houses." He crumpled the message in his fist. "And they are threatening war if I refuse." Lyra looked out at the kingdom spread below them, at the lights of villages and towns scattered across the landscape like fallen stars. These were the people she had sworn to protect. These were the wolves she had promised a better future. She would not let fear or threats take that future away. "Then we prepare for war," she said quietly. Kael turned to her, and in his eyes she saw not fear, but pride. "We," he repeated. "We." Lyra squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "I did not survive 14 years in the Darkwood to be intimidated by politicians with threats. If they want to fight, we will give them one they will never forget." A smile crossed Kael's face, the first real smile she had seen from him, warm and genuine and filled with something that looked very much like love. "That," he said, "is why my wolf chose you." Lyra felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. The bond between them pulsed with shared determination, shared courage, shared resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything since that first meeting in the Moon Court, together. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the exile from her pack, the years of solitude in the Darkwood, the slow transformation from victim to survivor to something more. She thought about the girl who had knelt in the snow at 14, branded and broken, believing that she would die alone and unmourned. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had earned her place through blood and determination, who had proven herself against every obstacle, who had awakened a power that had slept for 28 years and used it to defeat an opponent who should have been unbeatable. That girl would never have believed this moment was possible. That girl would never have believed that she could stand on a balcony beside a king, wearing a crown that matched his, preparing to lead a kingdom into an uncertain future. But Lyra believed it. She had learned to believe in impossible things. She had learned that the future was not written, that destiny could be shaped by will and courage, and the refusal to accept what others said was inevitable. The Northern Confederacy thought she was weak because of her bloodline. They thought she was vulnerable because of her past. They thought they could intimidate her into surrender with threats and demands. They were wrong. They stood together on the balcony, facing the darkness that was gathering on the horizon, and neither of them looked away. The prophecy had said she would destroy or save. In the end, she had chosen neither. She had chosen to fight, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as king and subject, not as alpha and omega, but as partners, as equals, as wolves who had finally found their pack. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the struggles of those below, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the rising moon. The sound echoed across the mountains, ancient and wild, a reminder that the world was older than kingdoms, older than prophecies, older than the petty conflicts of those who thought themselves masters of their own fate. But there was hope in that howl as well, a promise that the night would end and the sun would rise again, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could be found by those brave enough to seek it. Lyra lifted her head and howled back. And beside her, for the first time in 15 years, Kael joined his voice to hers. 2 wolves, 1 song, 1 path forward through whatever storms awaited. The beginning of something new. Below them, across the kingdom, other wolves heard that dual howl and felt something stir in their hearts. Hope, perhaps, or recognition. Or simply the ancient call of pack to pack, the reminder that no wolf truly runs alone. In villages and towns, in forests and mountains, in places where the exiled and the forgotten had made their homes, wolves lifted their heads and answered, a chorus rising into the night. A kingdom finding its voice, a future being written in howls and starlight and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Lyra listened to the sound, feeling it resonate in her bones, feeling her wolf sing in response. She had spent 28 years in silence, believing herself empty, believing herself alone. Now she understood that she had never been either. She had simply been waiting for this moment, for this man, for this chance to become something more than what her past had tried to make her. The howling faded slowly, leaving silence in its wake. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, but full. Not lonely, but connected. Kael took her hand, his grip warm and certain. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, we face it together. Together, Lyra agreed. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The end.